Hello, Thirds fans. Welcome to part two of our third fecta of origin stories. So you're now going to hear from Two Thirds, aka Nicole, and she's going to be letting us know a little bit more about, her backstory, where she comes from, and how that has influenced her life. So take it away, Two Thirds.
I really thought you might actually say, you know, you're now rocking with the best. Like it sounded like you might hit us with another cipher, but I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Thank you, Three Thirds, for the kind intro. And as we said, today we're talking about origin stories. And so uh, I, I, I think my origin story is probably not unlike many other people's, but of course, everyone's story is a little bit unique to them. And so here goes. I think my story is, where I've wound up, I hope, is sort of a testament to sort of being your own hero in your own story. And hopefully, my life is a testament to uh, what grit and determination can do to propel you forward, even if you think that maybe you come from really, really humble beginnings, and perhaps people don't know or don't think that you have as much potential as in your heart you do. So basically, I just turned 45. So I was born in the summer of 1975. My mother was a young, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl, age of 21. Gave birth to me by herself in Portsmouth. And my father was a 40-year-old Black immigrant from Trinidad and Tobago. And my parents' story is an interesting one, and I think highlights that just my very existence is just this unlikely story. So my mother grew up the daughter of a well-to-do military family. My grandfather was a prominent general in the army, and my grandparents dined with the likes of General Westmoreland and his family. And so they had a very important public image in life. And so my mother grew up, came of age in the 60s, a very rebellious time, and was very much the rebel herself. My mother is a brilliant, brilliant mind, a very smart woman, but I think has, through her life, felt that aside from her brain, perhaps she didn't have much else to offer the world. And my grandfather recognized her genius and pressured her to become a doctor or some other sort of uh, traditionally high stature kind of profession. She, being the rebel that she was, said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go join the army. And so my mother, at 20 years old, went and joined the army. And my mother was a pianist. She had played piano for many years. And so in the army and in all the armed forces, you can be a musician in the armed forces. You can be in a show band or part of the Navy band, etc. And so my mother was sent to the Joint Armed Forces School of Music, which is in Norfolk, Virginia. And that is where she met my father. My father was born in 1934 in Trinidad, and his beginnings were very humble. My father is one of 11 children from my granny, and he was so there's three. My granny was married 3 times, so he's part of the earliest set of kids. And at some point, his father left his mom. His father came to America, and left my granny Avis and her kids behind. And she could not, this was the 40s, maybe 1940s. She was not able to care for the kids. And so my dad and some of his siblings were essentially sent to an orphanage. So he was in an orphanage from, as I understand it, from about the age of 11 until he became an adult. And just things happening in your life for a reason. My older brother just recently told me this story, that when my father was at the orphanage, one of the nuns put a saxophone in his hand and he learned to play saxophone, self-taught, and by all accounts was a beautiful saxophonist. I mean, I heard my father play. He was just a naturally gifted musician. And so he came of age and played music. And, there's a lot about my father's life that is still a mystery to us, his kids. But I think in 1964, so around the age of 30, my father immigrated to the US. My grandfather sent for him and he came. And my dad enlisted in the Navy. And so he served in the Navy, and being from the islands, all of our American history regarding slavery and discrimination and Jim Crow laws and all of that, he didn't come with that baggage. He wasn't oriented to that history. And so he when he was called the N-word and things like that, it took him a while. He had a learning curve to figure out what that was all about. So he came and he got married to a lovely woman, Lily, and they had 2 kids, my older brother, Philip, and my older brother, Avis, and they were in Columbus, Ohio. And at some point, my father got stationed at the School of Music in Norfolk, Virginia. And so again, my dad's about, 40 or, 39 years old or so, meets my mother and is her instructor at the School of Music. And so hijinks ensue. And something that surprisingly, I really didn't put my full mind to until very recently, which is odd to me, but the way how it had to happen is my father had to have cheated on his wife and in any respect left his wife and kids for my mother, because my sister is only 2 years older than I am. So if you do the math, right? But he left his first wife. He married my mother, much to the chagrin, as you can imagine, of my maternal grandparents. Because again, here's this prominent military family, and the oldest daughter has run off with a Black married man, gotten married to him, and has now had this baby with him. And again, my existence, I talk about it as being sort of improbable and unlikely. Even my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, told my mother to have an abortion. And thank God that my mother was so rebellious, because she was like, no, I'm not doing that. And I can't imagine how scared she must have been at the age of 21, having this little brown child, because at the time she had me, my father had already been stationed overseas in Italy. And so that's just the backstory of how I even came into existence, which is, as you can see, already dramatic enough. And so, my parents were only together for 3 years. I spent the first 3 years of my life in Italy. Once my mother gave birth to me, she and I flew overseas. That's where, I toddled around and she and I palled around, and life was good. And then we came back to the States, and at some point my mother decided that, things were not as fun as she thought they would be, I guess, being married, or it didn't pan out the way she thought, or maybe my dad wasn't who she thought he was. And so she decided that she wanted to leave him. And as the story goes, and I don't remember it, but she says that when she went to leave my dad, he basically said, "You can leave, but you're not taking Nicole." And that this was said with me in one arm and a knife in the other. And so she left without me. And as I understand it, the way that she was able to collect me was at some, soon after, but later point where she came and took me from daycare and kind of scooted away with me. And it's such an odd story to me. Again, I think this sort of speaks to some of what I'll get to in the terms of how I grew up viewing my father. But it's like, I didn't think of my father as an adulterer, and I certainly wouldn't think of my father as a violent man who would threaten someone with a knife. And yet this is an indisputed story, because my father was always wonderful to me in my eyes. So here I am. I'm, 3 or 4 years old. My mother is all of, 23, 24, 25 years old. She's raising me on her own. And it was, I have some vivid memories of this time being very young and kind of just starting school. And I think it's a very American notion, this idea of identity and who we are and where we fit. And I can remember distinctly occasions where someone would say to me, "What are you?" And I'd be like, "I don't even know what you mean. What do you mean? What am I? I mean, I'm me. I'm me. I'm here. I'm human. I'm what?" I did not know. I really did not know that I was living a Black experience at this tender young age. And I can remember kids, like my mom picking me up and then being like, "Well, who's that?" And I'd be like, "That's my mom." And they'd be like, "That's not your mom." And it was very challenging and trying as a child to hear someone deny me of who I was in terms of that being my mother. That was just really, really tough. So about 6 years old, my mother remarried, and she married a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy. So he seemed fine. He was a lot younger than she was. And I mean, my goodness, what was she at this point? Only maybe 28. So maybe he's 23. He's a young guy. And as it turns out, there's no plainer way to say it than he was a racist. So my mother, with her Black child, marries a closed-minded white man who has no problem calling people niggers in the street, and was a very violent man, an angry man, an emotionally immature man. And as you can imagine, that was a pretty tough environment to be in. When I was 9, they had my younger brother. So he was born in 1985, and so he was born in January, and my mother had the proverbial Irish twins because I had a sister born in December. So here I am, this little Black girl in the middle of this family of all blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, thinking, just biologically looking around and being like, okay, now how do I fit in here? And not to mention, like, I know this white man does not like me. Now, thankfully, my dad was local, and as you can imagine, there was much turmoil. But in these times, courts don't give custody to dads; they give it to the moms, right? So even if he were to go in to a court and say, "Look, my daughter's in an unhealthy situation for her, and here's the evidence," it would have been very unusual for a court to have sent me to live with my dad. Not that I necessarily even think that would have been the best of outcomes, but anyway. So I'm sort of growing up, and it's a very trying time. I very much pull into my own shell. Again, the times being what they were. My dad to me was this larger than life figure, incredibly gregarious and charming and loving. And I think that was informed by his time in the orphanage. I think that he had all this love inside, and so he would give a lot of love, and he wanted a lot of love. And that's actually how I love today, because my mother, again, harkening back to her feeling like her brain was the thing that she had to offer, she was not particularly warm. She was not particularly encouraging. And she was not quick to recognize achievements or that you had done well. And so I learned early on to, number one, be perfect. Because if I know if I'm perfect, then even if she's not saying anything, at least I know that she's not mad at me or that she's not disappointed in me, even if she's not vocalizing. It was almost like I was invisible to her. And I also learned early on how to read people, because with a violent stepfather, you would have to be always trying to figure out, how is he feeling today? Am I going to get yelled at today? What eggshells do I need to choose to walk on today? And I really withdrew. And I was always a good kid. I always did well in school, but very, very pulled into myself, very quiet, very shy, which if you know me today, you know that is not at all who I am in the world. I was playing a game last weekend with friends, and they said, who's the most likely to curse out a stranger or get arrested? And it was like, everybody looked at me. So anyway, so about, gosh, maybe 12 years old, I had an aunt. This is my mother's sister. And in contrast to my mother, my aunt had darker features. She had dark hair and dark eyes. And whenever I would pal around with her as a kid, people assumed I was her kid, which is quite the opposite of my own mother. And she was just so loving towards me and kind towards me. And I credit her with rescuing me. So at about 12 years old, I went to live with her and her husband and his 2 kids from his first marriage. And again, this is about 12 years old. So, I'm like, I am going through puberty and all of that. And I was told that when I first got there, that my aunt's husband, my uncle, was like, when she got here, she didn't even smile. And they really saved me, and they really swooped in, and they really showed me that your family of birth, if you will, doesn't have to be the family that you end up with, and may not be perfect, but there will be people who will love you and will take care of you and will be your family. So I told y'all I wasn't going to be able to get through this one without crying, but I give her all the credit in the world for doing that, for taking me in and helping me through a tough time. So in any event, I guess about 7th grade, and I know I'm just going on, but about 7th grade, I have these memories of, I'm in Virginia Beach growing up, and I can remember distinctly one time, but which is sort of representative of a couple times, being in a classroom and the teacher saying something like, you all need to make sure that when you're handwriting, literally handwriting, you need to make sure your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. He's like, I've only seen one person smart enough who was writing so fast that they didn't have time to cross their T's and dot their I's. And I thought, now why does he think I could be that smart? Maybe I'm that smart, right? Like, you're assuming I'm not that smart, but I might be that smart. And I just remember that vividly, because I thought that was one of the first instances of me thinking, oh, well, I'm gonna show you how smart I am. I'm gonna be smarter than that person, and I'm gonna cross my T's and dot my I's. And it was the first time that I feel like I got a little bit of grit down in my system. And I've had a number of instances like that to date. When I first got to college age, I was just finishing high school. And let me be clear, in contrast to 1/3, college was not emphasized, even though my mother was a college graduate herself. My father had not gone to college. So education was not a priority. Nobody cared if I made the honor roll or I didn't make the honor roll. Nobody was taking me on any college tours. Nobody was talking about what I was going to do with my future. Like there was none of that. This was just me at 17 trying to figure it out. So I I don't know any I don't even like all I remember is hearing my friends talk about what schools they were applying to and I was like, well, I guess I'll try to apply. I'll apply to JMU, sure. I mean, I think JMU might have been the only school I applied to in fact. And I got accepted and my mother dissuaded me from going. She tried to say, well, I think at 18, you're not old enough to know what you want to do for the rest of your life. So, I just don't think I don't think you're mature enough to go. And it was sort of like, let me be clear, this was not like, oh, you should take a gap year to figure out who you are. No, this was like, the message I got was like, college, you're setting your sights too high, right? And I was like, well, fuck you, I'm going. And I went and I can't, and of course it was like, nobody talked about college. Of course, there was no money for college. So I go, my grandfather, the same one, gave me a little bit of money to go. And so I went and had loans as well and did fine at James Madison, did fine, came home for the summer, had a summer job. And this is when the OJ trial was going on. So this is like the summer of 94. And so I'm working at a little hotel at the oceanfront. We're watching the coverage every day. And the court stenographers were getting all this attention because they were turning these daily transcripts. So anyway, I'm sitting there trying to figure out, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to be? What do I want to major in? I called my mom and I said, I think I'm going to be a pharmacist. And she was like, yeah, why don't you be like a court reporter? And so I actually ended up being a court reporter. And that involved going to like a trade school. And I did that. And so on the one hand, it's sort of like, there goes my mother telling me what I, trying to lower my sights, but at the same time, choosing to do that exposed me to the law and exposed me to this career path. And again, I'm fine. So I do that. I become a court reporter. I'm finding myself in these depositions and in the courthouse, and I'm watching these lawyers, and I'm like, I'm at least as smart as these people. I know I could do this, right? And I'm like, okay, but I got 3 more years of college I gotta finish. So again, it was sort of like this, like, well, convincing myself and trying to be my own hero. I'm like, no, you can do this, you can do this. So I did it. I went to college, put myself through college, got into a great law school. But before I did, I remember distinctively, I went to like this college fair, or maybe it was a grad school fair. And I was talking to this Black woman who was a student at UVA and one of these student ambassadors, and talking about the LSAT score. And she's like, well, if you don't have a 167, then, it's probably not gonna work out. And I only had like a 163. And, these people wrote to me, they gave me a full tuition scholarship. And I was like, you cannot listen to detractors. People will always be quick to tell you what you can't do. They will always be quick to tell you what's not possible. And you've just got to shut that out. Even at law school, I come into law school and I'm like, well, clearly I am just lucky to be here because these people they are from Harvard and Yale. And by the way, when I went back to school, I'm just a commuter student at Towson University. No knock on Towson, but I don't think a lot of people launch to the number 7 law school from Towson University. Okay. So I'm like, I don't even know if I'm smart enough to be here. And I have major imposter syndrome, but I muddle through. And then, I'm again, summer law clerking experiences. It's like, should I even be? Am I smart enough to be here? Am I good enough to be here? That's just a theme that sort of plagued me. But I've just always somehow been able to rally and dig deep and say, no, I belong here. And so I guess the lessons of my childhood are that, even when nobody else believes in you, you have to believe in yourself and really tether yourself to anybody who's your fan or who's in your corner. Those are your people. And sometimes sometimes the people who aren't your people maybe your family. Maybe that's someone closest to you. And that's okay. That's okay. But I just think that I want anybody out there who's listening who feels like nobody in my family has gone to college or nobody in my life has done this or that or the other. Like, you might be like, why would that work out for me? But why not you? Why not you? And fuck them if they don't like it. Like, do you is what I would say. And so that's my story.
Wow. Wow.
It's a little heavy.
No, it's good. Like,
Beautiful.
it is.
Because the outcome, right? That grit, everything that you pulled from it, it, it is inspirational. And it is, I mean, like, it's not so much what happens to you, like, as what you do with it, right? Like, we talk about whose fault something is, that something happened, but then we all, regardless of who, created a situation, have the responsibility to take ownership of ourselves. And you've clearly done that and done it in a way that is super transformative and extremely inspirational. And like, in all honesty, walking down the street, no one's gonna know, but I applaud you for being transparent and sharing your story, because that's where the real benefit comes from. Because it's easy to put up a facade,
Right.
but when you pull back the curtain and let people know, like, no, like, you want the glory, but here's really the story, right? Like, that's powerful.
It's really, really powerful. I have a question for you. What you talked about your aunt and uncle taking you in, and then I noticed you talked about sharing with your mom when you were going to go to college and when you were thinking about pharmacy school. Like, what was kind of that relationship like once you left her house and were with your aunt and uncle?
Yeah. So what I left out of the story was that the experience living with my aunt and uncle, that was probably about a 3-year stint. And then my mother wound up getting divorced from my stepfather. And so they, kind of sent me back. Like, I went back to live at home. And so I was back home with my mom, but I was very independent. My mom had 2 little kids. And so I just I was doing me, my high school was close by. I'd walk to school, I'd have my activities. I just did my own thing. My relationship with my mother, sadly, I think was sort of to 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 this day, in a way, sort of irreparably harmed through that process. Because, again, trying to spare y'all all the gory details, there were many times where I felt I was sort of coming under attack from my stepfather, and she would not step in and defend me. She would not. She I feel, violated your most basic responsibility as a mother, which is to care for your children and to protect your children. So, yes, to answer your question, we have struggled for a long time. My mother and I have struggled for a long time. We continue to have our challenges to this day. Maybe 10 years ago or so, my mother took ownership of some of the choices that she made when I was younger and did apologize. However, she's still a really difficult woman. Um, she's just not, again, she's not warm, she's not encouraging, she's not very loving. What I will say in her defense, and I think one of the things that I actually got from her, is, like I said, she's a rebel and she's really tough. She's been through some tough things in her life, And I know that some of the things that she experienced sort of shaped her, who she is in the world and how she shows up in the world. But and it's sort of this juxtaposition, because while emotionally my mother is not someone that I can go to for emotional support, if I needed her to come, like if I needed $500 or I needed her to come and show up and do something, she would do that. So so she's there at the end of the day, but in the day to day, I think relationships are just really hard for her. And I think, again, in some ways we're kind of alike. And I think who I am, when she looks at my life, I think she is confronted with what her life could have been
Mm.
if she maybe made some different choices. And so I think there may be pain for her wrapped up in our relationship too.
Mhm.
So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, but I can tell you it really informs the way I parent my girls. I just kind of, to your earlier point in the first segment, 1/3, it's like holding space for them, validating them, allowing them to be who they are, and saying who they are as they are is good.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's such a powerful story.
Thank you. Is it? I don't tell it all the time because you see it makes me emotional, but
The
But I
emotions are
think
bad, and it is a powerful story.
yeah, and I think it's a testament to who you are,
mhm.
um,
Mhm.
and who you, not only who you are, who you've become, but also how you are growing your own family and how you nurture them, and we see that.
Mhm.
So,
And how you're growing and honoring your own soul and spirit and
yeah,
being your own person.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's like nothing is an accident, nothing is a surprise to God. It's all as it should be, right?
Mhm.
it's good. It's good.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, we love you.
Love you.